Hi, I'm Professor Halsby. Welcome to part one of our lectures on rhetoric and argument, where we're going to be discussing key terms and definitions. Please note that all of the PowerPoints displayed in this lecture are also available on Canvas if you experience poor video quality. Today, we're going to be talking about key terms for argument. This will include two definitions of argument and how they relate to the terms fact, value, and policy. It means we're going to be talking about structures of argument, including the syllogism and the enthymeme, as well as Alan Monroe's motivated sequence. We're going to be talking also about participants, audiences, and spaces of argument, the people who are involved and their responsibilities, the audiences for whom arguments circulate, and the places or the locations where these arguments might be found. Before we get started, I have a short clip that gets to what argumentation is, based on the way that it creates new terms and definitions or new distinctions between kinds of claims and the contexts in which they operate.
The warehouse got a ping pong table last week. Imagine comes down and plays with Daryl. Sometimes I bring him juice. My boyfriend is 12.
What has two-stage chicken legs and sucks at ping pong?
Hi, Kelly.
Guess whose boyfriend it is?
I don't want to guess.
I'll give you a hint. It's not my boyfriend. I think it's a guy over here. I don't talk trash. I talk smack. They're totally different. Trash talk is a hypothetical. Like, your mom is so fat she could eat the internet. But smack talk is happening like right now. Like, you're ugly. I know for a fact. So I have the evidence right there.
In the clip, Kelly Kapoor is drawing attention to a distinction between two different kinds of argument, trash talk and smack talk. Trash talk is hypothetical, smack talk is real, in your face. But that's so much of what argumentation is, drawing up divisions or distinctions between two different kinds of arguments and then suggesting different reasons why they work in different contexts or in different ways. Our textbook offers two different definitions of argument: arguments as things and arguments as relationships. When we talk about arguments as things, we're talking about speech that we exchange between different participants in an argument, and one person presents a claim and then supports it with evidence to gain assent to the claim or to get other people to believe that the claim is true. We've already thought about arguments as things in the past when we've talked about claims of policy, fact, and value in the ancient rhetorical theory section. When we talked about them in that earlier section, we referred to them in terms of the genres of forensic, epideictic, and deliberative. Fact-based claims are like forensic rhetoric because it's concerned with the past and what is or isn't the case. Value-based claims are like epideictic rhetoric because it is about praise or bad. Policy claims are like deliberative rhetoric, which are oriented toward the future and about what we should or shouldn't do with the best intentions in mind. And so when we talk about arguments as things, we're talking about speech that we exchange, as well as discrete kinds of claims that we make when we're thinking about past, present, or future. When instead we think about arguments as forms of interaction, we're thinking about how arguments as things and the people using them interact with them. These kinds of relationships are modulated by three factors: culture, ritual, and also learning and teaching. When we say that relational context, when my mother, for instance, goes to TJ Maxx, it's a very unique way of authorizing arguments that might not be acceptable in other cultural contexts. Group behavior with ritualistic features, that's to say that we are engaging in the same kinds of arguments, arguing this a new way every single time that we have. Finally, arguments as and learning how to argue when we listen to other people argue or when we argue ourselves. When we see someone on television use an argument that connects a particular claim about climate change to evidence such as rising carbon dioxide levels, we learn ourselves how to make those similar kinds of connections. When we use that kind of argument, other people become capable of using those warrants as well. And so when we think of arguments as forms of interaction or relationships, we can think of them as modulated by culture, as kinds of rituals, as well as modes of teaching and learning arguments with other people. All in all, arguments are things, arguments are relationships, and the rest of this lecture is going to go into both of these categories in some detail. When we think about arguments as things, most often we are thinking of them as structures or organizations of information that allow us to convey an argument to someone else. The earliest forms or structures of argument that allow us to think of arguments as things are the syllogism and the enthymeme. The syllogism is long-form reason, a way of reasoning that first developed in philosophy in which a statement is offered, a second statement is offered, and a conclusion is provided that is a permutation of these two statements. According to our textbook, a syllogism is a statement in which a conclusion is inferred from the truth of two premises. So if our first premise is that all pandas are mortal, our second premise is that John is a panda, then the permutation of these two premises would be John is mortal, taking the two items that we've already talked about and then combining them into a logical conclusion. All work is shown. You can see all of the steps taken. The enthymeme is a similar form of reason, but unlike the syllogism, some element is left out for the audience to fill in. By leaving some part of the enthymeme out, what this allows is rhetorical persuasion, or the feeling that the audience is in on the act of logical reasoning. The 1990s ad, Be Like Mike, featured Michael Jordan, for instance, drinking copious amounts of Gatorade, followed by the sign, Be Like Mike, that aired at the very end. What the audience would fill in is the idea that drinking Gatorade would allow them to be like Mike. Now I'm going to play a short audio clip that is another example of an enthymeme. Once it's finished, I'll explain why it fits into this form of reasoning.
We're the people who can get your new carpet delivered and installed in one day. That means if you call Empire today, you can have carpeting tomorrow. Brand name carpeting from $6.95 installed with padding. In one day. Empire today, carpeting tomorrow.
For many of you, when listening to that clip, you knew exactly what the ending was going to be well before the clip ever ended. 588-2300 blank. The audience fills in the gap, and that way they are part of the persuasion. They are open to being part of the message because they are in on the process of logical reasoning. A related way of structuring arguments comes to us from Alan Monroe, who in the 1950s developed a sequence of arguments that allowed salespeople to put their products on display in an easy and accessible manner. The sequence that he proposed in speeches was that he would grab an audience's attention. You would establish that they needed something or that there was something lacking from their lives. You would satisfy that needs, likely with a product that you had in your possession. You would allow them to visualize how it is that their lives would be changed or different once that product was part of their lives. And then finally, you would give them a call to action, giving them specific steps or instructions to take to acquire this magical new thing that was going to transform everything. Monroe's motivated sequence lives on today because we can see it in patterns of speech that appear on television advertisements. For instance, take a look at Billy Mays' advertisement for OxyClean.
Hi, Billy Mays here.
Cleans, brightens, and eliminates odors all at the same time. It allows you to see a need, the stain that's on your floor, and then it satisfies that need by providing a product, OxyClean, and then allows you to visualize exactly how that product removes those stains from your floor. What's omitted from this clip is the part where Billy Mays tells you that for a short-term payment of $19.99, you can get a $40 value, etc., fulfilling the call to action that is the last stage of Monroe's motivated sequence. I'll also shortly show the clip for the Snuggie, which does similar work, getting the audience's attention, establishing that they need something, satisfying it with a product, and then allowing people to visualize how their lives will be changed. When we think about Alan Monroe's motivated sequence, the syllogism, and the enthymeme, we're talking about arguments as things. They are objects or structures that we transact or exchange with each other in order to make claims and gain other people's assent. Next, we're going to start talking about arguments as relationships or as forms of interaction by looking at the specific responsibilities given to participants, the audiences of argument, and the spaces where they circulate. Presumption and the burden of proof describe the obligations or the responsibilities given over to arguers. Typically, when we think about arguers, they take on the form of an affirmative or a negative, or a plaintiff and a defendant. They're usually oppositional in nature, and so they have different roles or different tasks that they have to fulfill. For an affirmative or for a defendant, they possess the feature of presumption. Presumption signifies a predisposition that we should believe that a given set of facts or information is true unless proven otherwise. When someone is a defendant, we give them the presumption of innocence, believing that they are innocent or presuming that what they are saying is true rather than casting doubt upon it. However, if you are a negative in a debate, your role is to question the affirmative. Likewise, if you are the plaintiff in a court case, you have the burden of proof, or the responsibility to offer reasons that would overcome the presumption of the opponent and cast doubt upon it. And so presumption and the burden of proof describe two different roles given to the participants in a debate. One of them affirmative, given the role of given presumption, and the other negative, who is given the burden of proof. The audiences of argument can be divided into two. In the textbook, it talks about the universal and the particular audience. The universal audience is the audience of all reasoning beings in humanity. If everyone were presumed to be rational, capable of reasoning, then the universal audience would be the audience to whom this message was addressed. In other words, if we needed to get emergency information about COVID-19 out to the public, it would be addressed to a presumed universal audience, all people who are capable of reasoning, or all people who are capable of taking in a message. Likewise, when we dispose of nuclear waste, it has become a problem for scientists to develop messaging that wouldn't just last for 10 years or 20 years, but hundreds or thousands of years into the future, making them imagine a universal audience for whom a single message would still be intelligible. The question is, what would it take to communicate with all of humanity? How would it be possible to create a message that would be available to everyone? Typically, the universal audience is considered an ideal, whereas the particular audience is the actual, the real world where we engage with real audiences who have their own dispositions, judgments, values, attitudes, opinions, rituals, and traditions. Audiences bring a lot of baggage, and it isn't possible to just send out one message or to convince everyone with one message that you're sending out to the public. And so particular audiences attempt to account for this by saying that audiences bring their own baggage with them. Finally, the spheres of argument describe the places where it is that arguments can be found. From smallest to largest, the personal, the technical, and then the public are the places where these arguments circulate. The personal sphere is a place of limited circulation and informal reasoning, meaning that people aren't using syllogisms, they're using enthymemes more often than not, and the arguments that are made are intuited amongst the people who belong to that personal sphere. The participants are lay participants or non-experts, and so the concerns of this community largely regard the members of that community. It is the place where the most informal arguments occur among a small number of people involving limited demands for proof and are often about private topics. The technical sphere, by contrast, has expert participants who use formal reasoning, and the participants in this sphere can vet each other's arguments because they all belong to the same shared community. However, like the personal sphere, the arguments that are made in the technical sphere have limited circulation. It is an argument sphere that has explicit rules for argument and is judged by those with specific expertise in the subject. Finally, the public sphere is the largest or widest sphere of argument circulation. In terms of the other terms we've just discussed, it is most like the universal audience. It is the argument sphere that exists to handle disagreements transcending personal and technical disputes. When arguments escape the personal sphere or escape the technical sphere, they go into the public sphere where they can be interpreted, misinterpreted, and renegotiated. Twitter is a good example of a small public sphere because of the way that small personal disputes and technical information can escape and then become part of a larger discussion. Although that doesn't always happen, and sometimes these arguments also stay in their respective spheres. Today, we've talked about arguments as things and arguments as relationships and gone into some detail about them. I'll see you next lecture to talk about warrants and the Toulmin model.